The EFF, we don't trust them. We think they've got the worst traits from the ANC, which the ANC wants to get rid of. The MKP, it's a disaster site, which we hope does not last long. We don't doubt there is corruption in the police, so I think for us it's useful to have the Commission inquiry to shine a spotlight, even beyond the individual of a minister. We think the corruption goes much, much deeper. It's not just about one person.
Mkhwanazi, how do you feel about the allegations and the fact that a minister is still being paid on special leave? Welcome back to Palatable Politics, a show where we make politics palatable. With me, your host, TJ Maslela. Welcome to the show. In today's session, we're going to be discussing labor, how it impacts you, me, the economy, and everyone. Here to give us insight is Matthew Parks, who's also the COSATU Parliamentary Coordinator. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Can you give us insight as to how you got involved in politics and labor issues in particular?
I guess from when I was a kid, growing up in the 80s, that time apartheid was, very fresh in your face, and you couldn't escape it. I think I was fortunate that I came from a Catholic family, so whatever you're taught at church was the exact opposite of what apartheid was like. And then also that I think I was fortunate that my father was a journalist, so he would also tell us what he had seen, going out to townships, reporting on protests, the kind of brutality of the apartheid government. And then I think perhaps I was fortunate that he had a lot of contacts, activists, comrades who'd come to hide at our house when the police were looking for them. Because it helped too for ANC or UDF activists in the run to go and hide in a white suburb. Police would be less likely to look there, would be better behaved, etc. But the police would still come and, sniff around, quite irritated. But so that's how I got involved. And then my father later left because being a journalist was not always good for one's health. That time the party government wasn't keen on journalists.
Okay, makes sense.
They would meet a sticky end sometimes if they dug too deep. So he was one of those who irritated them quite a bit. So he left 87, 88, and I later also went overseas to go study, spend some time in the Soviet Union, been involved basically in the ANC since that time. Coming to COSATU was a natural progression. I've been at COSATU's parliamentary office the last 16 years. I've been involved in Parliament for about 26 years or so. So it's a good space to be in, make a small little contribution to trying to, fix South Africa, deal with issues, improve people's lives. It's there's contradictions, there's things to navigate around.
Contradictions?
We'd all fought for democracy and a better life for all. And of course, you do see some comrades misbehaving, creating a better life for themselves, doing the exact opposite of what everybody signed up for. But I think it's a good space. I think at times we look at all the headlines and we think everything is doom and gloom. If you go into Twitter, which is not always advisable for one's mental health.
I had to leave, but I'm slowly coming back to Twitter for that, or X rather.
It's just like a tavern next to a taxi rank. It's a dodgy, toxic place. So you would assume that South Africa is some terrible place, the white genocide and other nonsense. But you can look at so many things have improved. Since where we were in 84 to today, chalk and cheese. Even where we were in 94 to where we were today. But then at the same time, you can't also discount the many own goals we've made, especially in the last, since Polokwane in 2007. But even then, you can see, and it's right to be impatient about the slow pace of change, but you can also see improvements since that Polokwane decade of insanity.
AKA president, former president.
Former president / karaoke singer. Now leader of some political stockfell. But you can see, we're bleeding with load shedding. We had 12 hours of load shedding at a peak about 2.5 years ago, or 3 years ago. We haven't had it for a year and a half now. But there's still challenges around price of electricity, load reduction, cable theft. Transit was imploding, and it costs the mining industry billions of rands, which meant billions of rands of taxes for the state to fund hospitals, schools, etc. was lost. But you've seen a stabilization and improvement, not back to where it was in 94 at its peak, but beginning to claw back. You remember at one stage you had queues at our ports for ships to offload and pick up goods for 2 weeks at a time. It's been reduced, I think, to about 4 days or 3 days at a time now. Still further to go, but progress, Metro Rail, remember during COVID, just bizarrely was allowed to collapse.
Especially being such an important tool in terms of getting people to work.
Cities, 10 million commuters. It's still a far cry from what it used to transport, but the reopening lines stations were devastated, railway lines were stripped, informal settlements were amazingly allowed to be built upon tracks, but it's being rebuilt. And it's possible as they rebuild a station, they secured the lines to the next station, so they don't allow it to disintegrate again. Okay. They've got to change some of the platforms because the trains were bought by a certain former CEO who were together at UCT, but anyway, the wrong size, so they have to fix that.
They were too big.
Too high. And literally, it's like the gap is like about this high. And then the South African Revenue Service, SARS was the ingredient of the machine which made Madiba and Thabo Mbeki's administration so successful on so many different fronts. It's being rebuilt. SARS also was the epicenter of state capture project. And the current commissioner he's managed to really provide a pathway to rebuild in this state, removing corrupt elements, filling vacancies, bringing in skilled staff, investing in infrastructure, competent management. SARS, this financial year has actually exceeded tax collection targets by 19 billion rand.
Congrats.
So that's almost equal to 1% VAT hike.
Okay.
It's significant. In the broader scheme of things, it's not enough, but it's the right way forward. The tax compliance rate has improved under this current administration from 61 to 67%. Every 1% in compliance improvement is about 20 billion rand additional taxes to fund the state. So basically equivalent to a VAT hike. If we can get ourselves to 75% in the next, 3 years, that will basically kill all the financial budgetary issues, the debt, the deficit. It will help to hire more teachers, hire more nurses, fix roads, fix electricity. So those are the big kind of things you need to change. But I think the one thing we're failing terribly on is crime. Yes, we kind of dismantled the corruption networks largely, but it's still, the cans are still there. The police need a real overhaul. So I think what was done for SARS, you need to do for the police as well.
Okay.
Just really, because it's the scariest thing in the police. Half the vehicles don't work. Detectives are drowning in the number of dockets they've got. The skills of the police needs to be upgraded. It's just leaking on so many fronts.
Is it skills and numbers or just skills?
Both. Our police headcount is about half of what it should be. We should have double the number of police officers to match what is internationally best practice in terms of every police officer to number of people in society. We had a peak of about 208,000 police officers during the World Cup. It was allowed to go down to about 172,000, so about a 15% decline.
While population is increasing.
Growing, crime is increasing, unemployment is rising, etc. Is now the turning the corner. We've now managed to get the police up by about 15,000 to about 184,000. But also you have a high attrition rate too. People retire, they pass away. Or it's also a very stressful job. People leave early and so on. So we need to kind of get more people in. We need to kind of invest in their skills, improve their capacity. I went to one police charge office, and the detective's computer, I thought it was something from the 80s. Those old computers which are just black and green screens. I even wanted to ask, are you connected to the internet?
I think I saw one recently.
One of those ancient
That's a story for another day.
But look, to be fair to the police, they're paid a pittance. A constable might earn 180,000 rand a year. His take home might be less than 10,000 a year. Can't afford a house for his family. Can't afford a car. He travels in public transport. So I think SARS has shown that invest in public services, and you'll pay a price tag today, but the output you'll get, which will benefit society, the economy, which help to grow the economy, will actually generate more taxes than what you've spent. So you need to take a longer term approach.
So there's a notion out there, I don't know how wrong or right, it would be interesting to find out, but we always hear that the state is bloated, too many employees, takes up too much of our budget. But on the other side, you're saying that not enough teachers, not enough nurses, not enough police. Ooh. What's the story?
So in 94, we had about 34 million South Africans. Today it's about 64 million South Africans, so basically doubled in size. Our public service has basically remained the same size, about 1.2 million. So society has doubled, public service basically the same. And so that's seen a rising teacher-to-learner ratio, which impacts on the quality of education. A rising police-to-society ratio impacts upon the ability to deal with crime. You have one nurse maybe covering 2 or 3 nursing posts because of vacancies. You have doctors working 48-hour shifts. Home affairs, where there's queues. Nobody wants to go to home affairs because you must know you're going to spend it. If you're lucky, you'll spend 1 day queuing there, if you're lucky. There's a 60% vacancy rate. So we have to, I think for us, the point of SARS, they hired an additional thing. They hired about 40% more staff. They took it from 10,000 to 14,000. But SARS is now generating, it's improving tax compliance, from 61 to 67%. That additional 6% is equivalent to about 150 billion rand of additional taxes to the state. And yes, home affairs wouldn't generate that same amount of money. Yeah. But a home affairs was efficient, means workers spend less time queuing, losing a day's wages, means that workplace productivity is less disrupted.
Visas.
It means also if you can sort the visa issue for tourists or for investors, you attract more money into the economy, which means more jobs. And all public services will have a similar positive effect. So we must spend money today, and not saying we must spend money recklessly. We mustn't, just go crazy. But we should be looking at public services as an investment in the economy, as a way to grow the economy, etc. And if you look at successful economies around the world, be it Singapore, Canada, Sweden, China, they invest in quality public services. And as a consequence, people want to invest there. It makes it easier for businesses to grow, etc. So I think for us, we have to do. People also cry about the wage bill. I think, about 15 years ago, the wage bill was about 35% of the budget. It has decreased to about 31% of the budget. So the headcount is not growing. The wage bill is shrinking. The issue is around the debt and the deficits. Those have grown. But that's because the economy has been stuck at 1% growth for the past 2 decades. So you have to get ourselves to 3% growth. Key to getting ourselves to 3% growth is having efficient public services, home affairs for tourists and investors, electricity, bloodline for the economy, water, roads, sanitation, safety and security, education, all those things which help create a growing economy. You've got to fix those. Because you can keep cutting, you can retrench public servants, you can cut the wage bill to your heart's delight. You'll still have 1% growth the following year. And so you have to look at the longer term solutions.
On the whole wage bill, there's been a lot of outcry, and you have a particular position also on the increase for government officials. What's your stance there? So
the one currently, which has been the news since December, that's for public office bearers. So that's members of parliament, members of legislatures, and members of councils, municipal councils. It's for the judiciary as well. So it's not for nurses or teachers or police officers, not for public service.
Okay, so it's not for people underground. It's for
it's for politicians and judges. So we supported increases for magistrates. Magistrates don't get paid that much. It's about 1.1 million. But magistrates for us are like doctors. They're a skilled profession. They go to university, get qualifications. They have extensive legal experience. And the reality is that the senior counsel, the advocates who appear before them in court, get paid more than them. So you need to retain these magistrates.
Lawyers,
otherwise, they will just simply move to the private sector, better paying jobs, less stress. So we support the magistrates getting inflation increase. But disagreements around politicians. If you look at last year in the budget, the Minister for Finance said government is broke, it needs additional money, a 2% VAT hike. That was rejected. Then government got basically a tax increase to the back door, but not adjusting income tax brackets for the second year in a row, so bracket creep.
Can you explain that for?
So basically, every year government will normally adjust income tax brackets. There's about 6 of them, based upon how much you earn in a year, to avoid that when you get an increase, that you might get pushed to the next tax bracket, which is a higher tax rate. So to avoid you kind of inadvertently being punished because now your COSATU negotiated a 5% salary increase for you, and next thing you get pushed to the next tax bracket and you pay 5% extra in tax. So
your effective take home is still less.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for 2 years, the tax brackets wouldn't adjust it for inflation. So basically, your increases have been donated to the taxman. 2 months ago in Parliament, the Minister for Finance said, well, we might need more taxes in this next financial year. So for us, it doesn't make sense. You push for tax increases, but you're able to find R500 million to fund this increase for politicians and judges. So we think it sends the wrong message. We hope now that he's found this money, he no longer needs tax hikes in the next month in the budget speech. But also, if you look at performance, if you look at municipal councils, our municipalities are in a scary space. Most of them don't get unqualified audits. I've seen a real deterioration in municipal finances, in municipal services. We have many of them who fail to pay their staff salaries, their pensions, the medical aids, even the taxes, which is something SARS warned us about. So asking, so what base are we rewarding councillors who can't even fulfill the constitutional and the fiduciary duties? Paying taxes is an obligation. They've deducted taxes from municipal employees. They haven't handed it over to SARS in some councils. So why are we rewarding these delinquents? For us, that's the issue. Over December, we had to intervene with the Northwest Transport Investment. It's a bus company owned by the Northwest Provincial Government. The staff hadn't been paid over Christmas. Some haven't been paid for 14 months. Staff at SABC and the post office didn't get increases for 3 years. Thousands were retrenched. We had to intervene this past few days in Denell because 2 of the division staff were told on Tuesday, there's no money for your salaries this month. Fortunately, they got paid today. So asking, so what basis when people are struggling on the ground within government, let alone the broader society, why rewarding politicians? It sends a wrong message. And when governments are telling workers to tighten their belts, which they have been doing for many years, it gives a wrong message when government is seen to say, well, we should get something. And, some of the politicians have complained to us about us opposing it as COSATU. But I ask them, how do you compare a nurse or police officer? Because for them, it would take 25 years to earn what a minister earns in 1 year. And so also we're helping 25. To exacerbate the wage gaps. We should be reducing it. We shouldn't be, fueling it further. And look, to be honest with you, members of cabinet, premiers, MECs, they live a very comfortable life. They have largely subsidized housing, which you understand because they're not from Pretoria or Cape Town, but it's kind of a tool of the trade, so to speak. They get free cars. Again, so it's part of the tools of the trade. But then show some modesty when it comes to salary increases. And if we have spare funds, why don't we use it to hire doctors or hire staff for home affairs to reduce the queues, hire nurses, hire teachers, police officers, people who provide a real public service on the ground. But politicians must show some humility, must lead by example. So we had hoped the president would do what he normally does, to ignore the independent commission which recommended this 4% increase, give it a 2%. He kind of listened to us. He gave them a 3.8%, but we had really hoped we could have gone a bit further to say 1%, 2%. That would have sent, a decent message to society. So it's unfortunate. I think politicians need to understand how frustrated society is by crime, by corruption, by service delivery, and so on.
So maybe we should have started with this. COSATU, who do you guys represent?
So we represent workers. We have about 16 unions across different sectors of the economy.
Okay. So it's a bunch of unions coming together that represents different...
Yeah. So it's an association of unions. So you wouldn't join COSATU. You would join, if you're a nurse, you would join DENOSA. If you're a teacher, you would join SATU. If you're a clothing worker, you would join SACTU. If you were a worker at Pick n Pay or ShopRite, you would join SACAU. A mine worker would join NUM. And those unions come together. And so basically COSATU is an association or forum of the different unions, kind of bound by a history of struggle against apartheid, for democracy, for transformation, part of the liberation struggle, in alliance with the ANC and so forth. But even beyond those workers, because only about a quarter of workers are unionized, majority of them belong to COSATU. There's many other workers who are not unionized. Farm workers, workers in restaurants.
Is there a reason for that?
Some areas are difficult, like farms, geographically far-flung. Often the farmer doesn't want you to come into his property. people have,
Which is a concern.
The isolated, the low education. Farm worker in Namaqualand, you might only have a standard 2 education. You've never been to, because you don't have access to media. Domestic workers. So farm workers, you have about 1 million farm workers in the country. Domestic workers, also about 1 million. But again, they're scattered across 1 million houses. It's difficult to get access because there's a war, there's a gate, etc., etc. There's new sectors which are kind of rapidly growing, like e-platform sectors, like Uber drivers, call centers. Often unions struggle to kind of come to terms with the changing nature of the work, and they have to do it. Many of the unions are kind of used to where they've been organizing for decades, like the mining sector or the retail sector or the big factories.
I assume taxis is not one that's going to happen soon.
Taxis is difficult. I mean, you have about 250,000 taxi drivers. We just launched late last year Taxi Drivers Union. It took us a couple of years. It's not easy. Taxi owners are not the most gentle or diplomatic of souls. But we thought, look, everybody's irritated about taxi drivers in terms of the speed and how they behave on the roads. But also understand taxi drivers are having to work 18 hours in a day. They've got to collect a certain amount of fares to pay the owner. And then they, after they meet that target, then whatever they get above that, that's theirs. So that kind of creates a perverse scenario where they have to drive like Michael Schumacher to get as many passengers as possible so they can also buy food. And so you find most of the taxi drivers' labor rights are violated by the owners. They don't get paid minimum wage. There's no overtime pay for them. They work 6-7 days in a week. They're not registered with the UF, or if they get unemployed, or COIDA if they get injured in the workplace in an accident. So we need to find a scenario with the taxi industry that we can formalize the sector. We can make sure that taxi drivers have got formal job contracts, have got all the rights respected. But we also think there's a need for government to subsidize the industry because it is the backbone of public transport. And government subsidizes buses. They used to subsidize planes. They stopped that. Trains. Taxis are the backbone of our public transport. Transport more than 10 million commuters plus every day. And if you go to any township, any new area, any informal settlement, any village, taxis are inevitably the backbone. So they provide a valuable public service. It's one of the few black-led industries. But we need to have conversations that if we subsidize you, can you recognize your driver's rights? Can you treat them like human beings? Can we respect traffic laws, not drive like lunatics? And then, if you misbehave, we'll take the subsidy away. So we think that we need to have a bit of a quid pro quo. And then it could be a useful thing. And it's, to be fair to the taxi industry, it's unfair to them that buses are being subsidized. Taxis, which transport far more people, good luck. So we think we need to have that conversation. We respect that government's finances are limited, but let's have that discussion, see how can we transform. And it can be a useful thing. Something we've been discussing for 20, 30 years, but we need to really move on it.
With regards to labor as a whole, what is the status of labor? And I'll give a bit more context because, you'd have the former Capitec CEO would say that actually our unemployment is around 10%. Stats say the Statistician General obviously has a different view. From your side, dealing with workers, what's the story?
It's scary. It's depressing. We would take the stats that says expanded definition of unemployment to be about 42.4%. So
the bulk of that being youth.
Youth, black, colored, women, people with disabilities, people in townships and rural areas. We would love it to be 10%. If it was 10%, we would demand a public holiday to celebrate it, ticker tape parade. It's not. It's over 40%. And it's our greatest single national crisis. If you don't address it, it is going to explode one day. And we saw, like in Tunisia and other countries, you can take a small spark and then things will just explode. Even in KZN and Gauteng in 2021, the violence. And yes, there was a criminal and there was a political orchestration behind it because of a certain delinquent. But, it fed into a sea of poverty, of despair, of hopelessness. So we have to address it.
Would you say the 42% is an accurate number?
We think so. And look, maybe it's off by 1% or 2%, who knows? But I think we would trust Stats SA, which has been doing surveys and research for 30 plus years, over a gut feeling of a banking CEO. When we heard his point, and look, he's got a point that some people And he's right. People are making a way to survive.
Yeah, because I'd assume...
But it's not going to take unemployment to 10%.
And I agree.
We'd love it.
Yeah, I agree completely. But in terms of whether it's taxi drivers, domestic workers, in some case waitresses, probably even some farmers, farm workers rather, are those guys accounted for in the stats?
No, I think they are accounted for. Okay. So when stats, let's say, comes to your house, they have that question of like 12 pages. They ask you, it's like going for a full medical exam. And they ask you, do you have a source of income? They ask you 1,001 questions. And sure, there's always an element of mistakes, but I think the stats say budgets for that. But I think that for us is to give you a broad sample. And look, we would love stats to say to be wrong. We wish they were wrong. I'm sure stats they would wish they were wrong too. But I think we'd have faith in them. I mean, they've been doing this for 30 years. They're scrutinized, they adjust, and so on. And also, sometimes we mustn't also glorify some of the way people find money to survive. The guys selling peanuts in the corner, sure, they might put in, 1,000, 2,000 rand a month or whatever it is. But I suspect he wished he could have a better life. I suspect if he had a chance to go work as a waiter at Wimpy, he would grab it with both hands,
You said earlier that back in 94, the quality of life then and now for workers is chalk and cheese. Can you, what was it back then? What is it now?
Nothing. Well, number one, people can be treated like human beings. Before 94, under apartheid, black workers basically glorified slaves, no rights. You complain about anything, you get dismissed. Getting paid peanuts. People made to walk long distances to get to the workplace, made to work long hours, no labor rights, no right to overtime pay, no right to paid public holidays, no right to any basic law. Whatever rights workers had to be, fought hard for over many, many decades. Certain professions off limits, and basically with bound to education, etc. African, colored, Indian workers can do the menial jobs. So that's changed. Hasn't changed fast enough because you look at top management in the private sector, it's about 60% plus white, mostly male, and whites being about 7.5% of society, etc. But you can see progress on many fronts. You can see the public service has transformed, reflects the country's demographics largely. You can see the creation of a black and colored middle class, Indian middle class, which didn't really exist. I mean, before 94, if you had anybody who was black and middle class, it was amazing against all odds. Now, especially in Gauteng, you can see things have changed. You now have a significant social wage where government subsidizes public transport, no fee schools in townships with the school meals. Millions have been put through university and colleges with the NSFAS. Half of the country, the most poor, receive some form of a social grant. All these have issues. All of them have got imperfections, challenges, but they weren't there before. Free medical care for pregnant mothers, for kids up to, 2 years of age at clinics, etc. So you can see life expectancy has increased. So I think, when I see people saying, well, life is worse than it was before, ANC to the country, it's like, okay, let's not say ANC is perfect.
Okay, I hear you.
And ANC has earned all its right to be given a kick in the backside, etc. But I think to say we haven't made progress since 94, I think it's just fundamentally not true. We're not saying there's not problems: crime, poverty, unemployment, inequality. Not saying we haven't got fast enough. Not saying we haven't had a decade detour into state capture and stupidity. But so many fronts. I mean, look at 94. About a third of the country had access to electricity and water. Today it's about 90%. Again, there's issues there. How many RDP houses have been built? 4 million or something like that? Yeah. Again, they've got lots of issues with RDP houses. So I think there's huge progress, but there's still huge distances to go.
On the ANC, the national chairperson recently made some remarks with regards to employment and people looking for jobs. What were those remarks, and your guys' take on it?
So I think his point was that people mustn't depend upon the state for handouts. They must find their own way. I think the way he said it was crude and clumsy. Look, Gwede has his brand is crude and clumsy. He's an old man from a village, so He's a mine worker. He's not going to put perfume and frills and when he speaks. So look, he was right to say we mustn't depend upon the state. No society can do that. We need to create an entrepreneurial class. When we say we must create jobs, we actually also be saying how to help young people become entrepreneurs and to create jobs themselves. So that's right. He could have said it in a much more better way. I think the impression was given to people that he was saying young people are lazy. I don't buy that story. I don't think anybody's lazy. I think people want to work, and even people who say that South Africans are lazy, they don't want to take these jobs, and that's why employers hire people from Malawi or DRC or Zim, etc. I don't think it's true. I think if you were to go to Guguletu or Khayelitsha and say, come and be a taxi driver or bus driver, I think people would grab it with both hands. I think it's just about giving people the opportunity. But look, he's right. We have to, not everybody can work for the state. The state can take X amount of people. It's always about 10% of the workforce. We really need to create more jobs. We need to grow the economy. So on that point, he was right. And the state will always have limited resources. We're not Saudi Arabia or Qatar sitting on a gold mine of oil.
I mean, but we do have minerals.
Do have minerals?
Yeah.
Not enough in terms of like the gushing of cash like Dubai does. And also those guys have got much smaller populations too.
Okay, true.
Tiny populations. But look, I mean, I think he could have said it in a much better way. I think also because people are frustrated when young people have an unemployment rate of 60%, and then to be told that, well, you sort yourselves out. I think we can do better, and I think we can do better for young people in terms of the quality of education at our schools, at our TVET colleges, even at universities. I think we could do better to make capital more accessible, affordable to young people too, because often banks look at you and say, okay, well, how do you know you're going to give us back the money? So we've been pushing that government needs to come with a much bigger, bolder financial package for SMEs, for industrialization, for export sectors. Yes, you'll lose some of it, but we need to really see how to grow the economy, how to stimulate the economy. And we saw during COVID-19 when government put aside that there's about 250 billion rand for this loan guarantee scheme. The conditions the banks attached to it were so onerous, most SME people just said, look,
leave it.
We'll see after the pandemic dies down.
And with regards to immigration and what impact that has in terms of locals getting job, how real is that?
I think we have two problems with immigration. I think one is we have a flood of people coming into the country. You can see in the last decade, number of people from Zimbabwe with the collapse of Zim, from Somalia, but even from further afield, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Pakistan, you can see it. You can see it in our cities. I mean, even you go to most rural areas. I went to one village in Limpopo, which is so remote, it's not even on the map, and the spaza shop was run by Somalis. So it is a crisis. It is because there's no amount of jobs South Africa can create that can accommodate the entire continent or other countries and also address South Africans' needs. So it is a problem. I think many employers are hiring migrant workers because they're undocumented. So they're vulnerable. And if you're coming from Zim with an 80% unemployment rate, South Africa's unemployment rate of 40% looks like paradise. And knowing workers who are desperate, who have been willing to travel thousands of kilometers from Somalia or wherever, will accept the most horrendous conditions. They won't ask about minimum wage. They won't join a union. They won't even know what is overtime pay. So not just here, you'll find in the US too, you'll find in Europe too, that employers exploit migrant workers because of the desperation. And what are they going to do if they complain about their rights? They'll just dismiss them, and if they make a noise, they'll call Home Affairs. So something we need to address. It's difficult for government because you can't build a wall. Even the US can't build a wall. We built a fence, remember, and during COVID, the fence was stolen. So
but the BMA does seem to be doing some impressive work.
No, and they have to do more because sometimes it's just glaring that you have hijacked buildings, and unfortunately, it's friends from Nigeria, often other places involved in it. So you have to set an example. They've been doing quite a bit. I think about 50,000 people are deported every year, which costs government a lot of money too, because you've got to put them on flights and send them back. They might come back after that. It's a difficult thing, but I think Home Affairs are trying to do more, like smart investments. What do you call this thing? Drones.
Drones, yeah.
Because our border lines are so long. I think it's about 4,000 kilometers, if I'm right. We've got about 72 border posts. It's a huge amount of territory to protect. But also we have to have an approach where we can help, Lesotho or Mozambique or Zimbabwe also grow. Because you can't build a fence. You can't be an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty. So Mozambique does well. then it also helps to, accommodate Mozambicans back home.
And it also creates a market there for them to buy our stuff.
So hence we have intervened over December with this issue of Mozal. There's a chance of Mozal in Mozambique closing. And that for us will be a problem because you'll see jobs in Maputo disappearing. What happens then? They'll come to South Africa. So we have a vested interest in Mozambique doing well, for example. The other difficulty with immigration is that we've seen a flight of middle-class South Africans going to Dubai, the Middle East, to Australia, New Zealand, to Europe, to North America. And look, immigration is part of humanity's story, but when you see, those are largely middle-class South Africans, people with education, with money, etc. So it's a brain drain. So that is a problem because you're losing our skills. But also means the money the state has spent in their education is being lost. So we have a shortage of doctors. The government subsidizes medical students, more than 50% of the subsidies. Even when they pay, that there's still a huge subsidy. And you find that doctors, as soon as they finish community service, they pack their bags and they're off to London. So you find Britain, Canada, New Zealand, etc., actively recruiting our doctors, our nurses, our paramedics, our police officers, our teachers. And we've spent a fortune on these young people's skills, and then we're losing them. So we have to also have a conversation about how do we retain them. Some of it is about addressing issues like of crime and those kind of things, quality of life. Some is also saying, well, maybe we should pay them a little bit more so that we remain attractive to them. So we have to have those kind of discussions too, because otherwise we're catching the wrong end of both sticks.
On the whole thing of pay, minimum wage, I know fine there was a lot of fight back, but eventually you got done. Props to you guys and the role you guys played in that. However, when it comes to general economic theory, there's a thing of the higher the minimum wage, the more jobs you're going to lose. How real is that in terms of lived experience?
Yeah. So, I mean, minimum wage was introduced quite recently in 2019. Some employers, some critics say, well, minimum wage is the cause of our unemployment. So we had unemployment before minimum wage came into effect. Unemployment was already at 40% in 2019. So the unemployment hasn't largely shifted, except for the COVID-19 shutdown, and we largely recovered those 2 million jobs. There's been research done by academics from UCD, not just people complaining on Twitter, which has shown that there hasn't been a link between job losses and minimum wage. Other issues that, when minimum wage was introduced, we had a violent uprising in Durance in the Western Cape a few years before by farm workers. They were getting paid as little as R6 an hour. So basically about enough to buy half a loaf of bread, not enough to survive. If you pay people so little, eventually it will spark an uprising. People can only take so much. Today, the minimum wage is enough to buy about 1.5 loaves of bread. So there has been a substantial improvement. We've managed to almost double it since it came into effect. But when we introduced it, we had extensive discussion at NEDLAC with business and government. What is the right number, ratio, or amount? We didn't want it to be too high that we could cause job losses or automation, especially for vulnerable sectors. But we didn't want it to be too low that it makes no difference to people, especially the most poor. Because it largely covers people who are not unionized, where there's no collective bargaining, or quite vulnerable. So we came to 20 rand an hour. For the first 3 years, farm workers were paid at 90% of it, and domestic workers at 75% of it, and it was gradually phased in, just to avoid a big shock to the economy. And so that was phased in, and the farm and domestic worker numbers have increased. They were at about 900,000, they're about 1.1 million now. There's a moral argument too, but people need to have a decent life, need to buy food, not live in absolute poverty.
Which, in my view, if people get paid more, they also now have more disposable income to put back into the economy, and they just...
So that's the economic argument to it. Because we're producing shoes, clothes, food, restaurants are selling meals. So who's going to buy those products? The middle class is not big enough. Tourists are not going to come to South Africa to go shopping for clothes and macro. So workers, the majority, need to have enough money to buy those things. So it's an economic argument. Also, if you pay workers so little, they can't afford transport to get to work, they'll walk and they'll come to work exhausted. Workers can't afford a house, they can live in a shack, poor quality, overcrowded, exposed to bad health conditions, get tuberculosis, etc. Impacts there. And if workers are demoralized, they can't afford medication, they're not going to be productive. So it's an economic argument as well. And we did research, we looked at what happened in the US and Europe. It's helped to grow the economy, helped to reduce inequality. We look at Brazil, which is very similar to us. Same thing. So it's been quite useful. It doesn't resolve all our issues, but it's one useful tool in a variety of tools to try to address our issues.
One of the other tools, BEE. What has the impact of BEE been on workers?
So I know a lot of people like to complain about BEE, and we know it's not perfect. For us, the objectives were correct because you couldn't have 3.5 centuries of institutional discrimination, disempowerment, etc. And then come 94, vote, and then say, okay, good luck. We're not going to touch what happened in the last 3.5 centuries, but good luck. So it is necessary to try to break down the legacies of racism, etc. It has helped to achieve a black middle class. I think people often forget that people often assume BE is just the 30% black shareholding. And they get angry about Tenderpreneurs and cadres and the Tokyo Sequales of the world. But they figure that there's 2 other components or pathways to BE. One is the employee shareholder ownership program, where basically that a company investing would take workers at the company on board as shareholders. So that's benefited about 500,000 workers. So companies like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, others who came to invest, who said, okay, why don't you help these workers, your employees, become shareholders? These are listed companies. They have many shareholders. So that helps to improve workers' lives. It puts money into their pocket. It helps them also have an incentive to work hard because if the company does well, they do better. So the company also has a productivity boost because now the workers get a vested stake. It helps to also achieve generational wealth because, if you're not just becoming a wage earner, you're also having shares, you're able to accumulate wealth, albeit from, still the baby stages. We would love to see that actually be expanded. So we're more keen on the employee shareholder ownership program than the 30% shareholder. But, some companies who come to the country because of their own rules, it's a private family company, whatever the story might be, they can't do the shareholding 2 options. So they can do the equity equivalent, where they'll commit to hiring local workers, supporting local businesses, or buying locally produced goods for their company, or investing in local communities. And most companies will do that because it makes economic sense. If you're establishing a company here, it makes sense to hire local people, to buy local goods because it's cheaper, etc. And so many companies do that. So I think for us, those are the useful things. We should have a discussion that, if you're a Tokyo Sequale, you've done well, should you still be qualified to be? Because Chile already empowered. We think that's a fair discussion to have.
Once you've reached a certain net worth, it should be fine. Look, step aside. You fine. Let's focus on the next.
And, we think we can have those discussions. The objectives remain correct, but I think we can always discuss the modalities, what works, what doesn't work. People often assume that BE just means ANC cadres or black politicians. It's not true. BE basically covers about 98% of society. It covers black, colored, Indian. It covers all women of all races. It covers all workers of all races, so including whites. It covers all people with disabilities of all races. So it's much more inclusive than the kind of the caricature you see on social media, or there's a chap called Elon Musk, And also it's not unusual. And you find many other kinds. I was laughing that Elon Musk wants to buy a British airline. Was it Ryanair? And the Europeans said, no, it's fine, but 51% must be held by a European citizen. So you're not European, you're a US citizen, or maybe Canadian or something. So it's just ironic that Europe has the same kind of criteria. But look, we must have a discussion, because the one thing which we do think is fair in the critique is that if you have businesses or investors having to spend 14 months filling out paperwork, having to hire lawyers, no, we should make it simple. We should make something so simple that it can we compromise on 14 days? Can we find a way to just ease the red tape? Because if we do have a problem, if we're seeing 1% economic growth, we're seeing a 42% unemployment. And if you're seen to be a country with lots of bureaucracy, investors will just go elsewhere.
And employment equity, I know that's one that companies have, had a bit of a headache when it comes to compliance. What's your guys' take on that?
Look, again, the objectives are correct. We couldn't just leave apartheid in 94 and just say, good luck, let's hope the market will take care of things. Because you can see some companies have no interest in transformation. But also you need to find the right balance. You also must avoid micromanaging companies. You must find what is the right approach. So I could just ask people to make an effort to reflect South Africa's demographic diversity. There were some useful changes in the last amendments, 2023, where it correctly elevated regional demographics. Because before that time, you had some government departments simply applying national demographics across the board, rigidly. So you had a perverse scenario. There was a case in Pollsmoor Prison in Cape Town where the Department of Correctional Services said we're going to apply national demographics. So the staff headcount at Pollsmoor in Cape Town must be 80% black, 10% white, 10% coloured. The problem there was that the Western Cape's demographics are the opposite. It's 45% coloured, 38% black, 20% white. So it created a perverse scenario that it created a bit of a ceiling for coloured staff who couldn't get promoted. Then you had a perverse scenario that African staff would come from Joburg, get a promotion at Pollsmoor, sit there for a year, then move back to Joburg with a promotion. So that now regional demographics are elevated, which makes sense because Limpopo's demographics are 98% black. Northern Cape, Western Cape is majority coloured.
And Gauteng is completely different.
Gauteng is a Poikikos.
Yeah.
KZN's got a large Indian population. So it makes sense to reflect the local demographics. Also that there was some other useful things there as well. What is the other useful things? I forget.
Yeah.
So look, I think, also if you want to do business with the government, you have to get a compliance certificate from the Department of Labour. Are you complying with the minimum wage, the employment equity regulations, etc. Oh, the other change the government made, which we complained about at first, but we understand the government's intention. If you're SME, you employ 50 staff and less, you're no longer required to submit annual reports on employment equity. So basically, please do comply, but we're not going to chase you. So government was trying to ease the burden on small businesses, which are the engine of the economy. So again, it's not like what you see in social media, that it's this kind of rigid thing is not true. I think there are some challenges within it. I think we might have to do some more tweaking on it. I think the new was been the headline hype about targets. Perhaps we must reflect about that. How do we make it easier? But even there, to be fair to government, they were just simply saying, can you try to improve your demographic targets? Because you have some companies like in the banks, the retail sector, the insurance companies, who've made no effort at the top to transform. So the department now has the ability to say, okay, your headcount right now is 2% African women. Can you make it 5% or 10% over the next 5 years? So they're fairly modest targets, but they're just trying to encourage change and diversity. But also, look, to be fair, it's not rigid. If you have a nuclear power station and your target is an Indian woman, you advertise no Indian woman applied, you're not forced to go and find an Indian woman. Okay. There was about 7 different exemptions, but you should at least have made an effort to try to do something. But look, I mean, I think this won't be the last time we meant it, but it's still correct, and you can still see the benefits, because if government hadn't done anything, the public service would still be 90% Afrikaans and white. Women would not be anything besides secretaries. Today, if you go to government, half the DGs would be women. It's completely diversified. The other nice thing people don't realize, employment equity covers everybody. So it's slightly different than BE. BE is, African, colored, Indian, and then women and disabilities, workers. Employment equities here in South Africa, 64 million people, everybody's included. Okay. So if a company has no white males, they're falling foul of the Employment Equity Act. Okay. They must now go and hire white males. So
you
everyone is
have a
included.
job in the corporate also.
So it's just saying, try to make a bit of an effort. And again, the fact, we had about a year ago, the first woman CEO of an insurance company made headlines, which is a good thing, but should we also be celebrating that as well? Because surely 31 years into democracy, it shouldn't be that complicated to find a woman to become a CEO of an insurance company. Women have been going to university, getting BCom degrees. I mean, so there is a need to nudge industry as well.
On that, COSATU at some point was talking very strongly on decriminalization of prostitution. What happened there?
No, we're still on that same position for a couple of reasons. One, so it was actually pushed by our police union, Pop Group, because they felt we should not be arresting women who are desperate for work, living in absolute poverty, and now we're criminalizing them for trying to survive. Yes, you would say being a sex worker is not an ideal for anybody. I don't think any parent would wish that for their children. But also want to say, look, let's not criminalize people because of poverty or unemployment or because of desperation or hopelessness. Other thing also saying, let's not, punish people for their choices. This is their body. They have the right to do it. They're not hurting anybody. Also, from a perspective of law enforcement, often people who have inside information about human trafficking, child trafficking, etc., criminal activities, would be sex workers. And if you want to get intelligence from them, which can help the police deal with real syndicates, real criminals, then we need to avoid criminalizing them. It also means that these sex workers can't access all the labor rights. They can't register for the UF or for COIDA. All the labor rights that we celebrate don't apply. So they've been keen on being decriminalized. We've supported them. We've had engagement with government. We know it's going to be a controversial issue. But I hope that we can do it. Other countries have done it. And then we'll still have to have discussions about where can they practice the trade, etc. Because you may not want them to practice the trade in the middle of a community or next to a school. But those kind of restrictions also apply to other professions. Like you can't sell alcohol next to a school or a church. And you can't have certain businesses in a residential area. So we can have those discussions, but I think for us, look, it's not an ideal thing. I think there's the kind of jobs we would love not to have. But we should not also be punishing people because of the situation they were born into.
Understand it. Now, there are a lot of economists and, that say that investors shy away from coming into the South African market because of the amount of regulation, red tape, and one of them is, of course, you guys, COSATU. How much of a progressive or regressive role do you think labor unions play towards the development of the economy, especially given we've seen China's rise and I guess what they turned a blind eye to, and many others, even your Middle East, etc. How do we find that balance between being ethical, right, and having an economy that grows, that people can benefit from?
So I think investors won't come because we have high levels of crime. We have the issues of affordable, accessible electricity, the challenges of getting our goods through our ports, through the freight rail, the quality of roads, of water, sanitation, the skill levels of our workforce. I think those are the fundamental issues, or corruption, those kind of things. I don't think investors are worried about maternity leave. I don't think they're worried about overtime pay, paid public holidays. I don't think they're worried about occupational health and safety. Those are norms through most democracies, most industrial economies. If you look at the successful economies, most of them have all the similar laws. Be it Canada, be it Sweden, be it Singapore, be it China. Those countries are growing because they've addressed the issues of crime, of electricity, of water, of roads, of rail, of ports, etc. So I think for us it's about addressing the fundamental issues. But also, people often say, labor laws, suffocate the economy. You can't dismiss people. It's difficult to hire and fire. So during COVID, 2 million workers were dismissed overnight. So you can fire people if you want to. People are dismissed all the time. Be it mining companies, wherever. We're battling with it all the time. So I don't think that's an issue. I think it's a red herring. I think the issue is the infrastructure, the network issues, and so forth. But also, if I look at the clothing industry, which went through a very difficult time in the 90s, because when the tariffs were lifted too quickly, Chinese imports flooded, etc. The industry is now stabilized and is growing because there's a close partnership between the unions, the workers, and the employers and government through the bargaining council. So our unions actively go and monitor government clothing or textile tenders. When they see one, they will phone factories to say, please apply for this tender. Because that company gets a tender, that means they get money afterwards. That means they keep those workers paid and employed. They build a reputation, etc., etc. We keep members, workers keep jobs, government gets taxes. So we're largely in the same WhatsApp group. We have differences on many issues. We worked closely together with business during COVID to roll out the health and safety measures to manage the pandemic. Because we needed workplaces to be safe, workers to be safe. We helped to roll out the vaccination campaign, and you find where there's a high rate of unionization, there was high rates of vaccination. So the mining industry is very unionized. 99% were vaccinated quickly because of a close partnership. Many issues we've worked closely together on trying to fix electricity, trying to fix transit. We've worked closely with our colleagues in business on managing our relationship with the US for the past few years, because we want to see companies exporting the cars, the agricultural goods, the clothes, the chemicals to the US, because that means money for the company, which means salaries for workers, which means jobs which means taxes for the state. So I think you've actually found that we've got a lot in common with business. We need to see businesses succeed, because if business is collapsing, workers will be retrenched.
Now, on the Tripartite Alliance, which you guys are, well, it's Tripartite Alliance plus Sanko, right?
Plus a sidekick.
Okay. On the Tripartite Alliance, where do you guys stand? I mean, we see SACP wanting to contest, which I assume ultimately means that they would leave that, based on my understanding of the ANC constitution. Where does COSATU stand?
And we stand firm with the alliance. We recognize our challenges, the mistakes. We need to reconfigure it to make sure it has the strongest platform to hold government accountable, discuss key policy decisions, hold employees accountable. But I think for us, it's been a very useful platform. It helped achieve democracy, which benefited workers. It helped achieve all the many goals we've won through transformation since '94, again, benefiting workers. And it's helped respond to a lot of issues, the minimum wage, the COVID-19 response, etc. So I think for us, it still has a useful role to play, because when you look at unemployment and poverty and inequality, the whole transformation journey, only the alliance can really deliver it. Politically, there's no alternative to the alliance. If we look at the DA, the platform is to weaken labour rights, to undermine all the gains workers have achieved on that front. The EFF, we don't trust them. We think they've got the worst traits from the ANC, which the ANC wants to get rid of. The MKP is a disaster site, which we hope does not last long. The other little parties, like they're too small. But I think for us it's relevant. I mean, we're not blind to the ANC's failures. We've been very vocal about it. But I think a renewed or cleansed ANC can continue to lead. It's biased towards workers. It is a contested space. We think it's useful to have the SACP on board to provide a left perspective, to help nudge the ANC to do better and so forth. We have been quite concerned about the ANC and the party not speaking to each other. We're concerned about both of them contesting elections. So we do fear that could collapse the alliance. So that's one of the issues. In fact, we'll be raising tomorrow at the Lekgotla again and say we need to resolve this issue quickly. We're meant to have an alliance summit in about 2 weeks' time to resolve these issues. For us, it's just whatever the decision is, we must have a unified approach. If both of them are contesting is fine, but what are the modalities to avoid splitting the vote?
And so, based on what you've said about the other political parties and that state, does that mean COSATU was pro the GNU route, going with DA, IFP, RISE, etc.?
We had hoped the ANC would have won the election outright. Unfortunately, we were checkmated by a chap from Nkandla, who pulled a fast one, amazingly. Basically, if MKP didn't exist, the ANC would have kept a 50% plus one majority, because that MK votes was largely ANC, that 14%. But look, the results are the results. We had hoped for an ANC minority government. That was our proposal. Allow the opposition parties to provide the ANC three critical things: electing the president, passing a budget, and passing motions of confidence. So we had hoped that the opposition parties could have just run parliament, the ANC could have run government, and they could have agreed on votes of confidence, the president, the budget, those fundamental
issues. And then using
issues.
parliament to hold governments accountable.
Yeah.
Okay. As it should be.
So we were not keen on this kind of thing because, look, the DA campaigned on a platform against the minimum wage, against labour laws. So that's a bit of a difficult one for us. But look, the reality is the GNU is there and we expect them to deliver. Whether the ANC ministers are from the FF Plus or from the PAC or UDM, we don't care. You must deliver. So we engage with ministers of all parties, from whichever party, because if you're there, you must now resolve issues. So if there's issues of Home Affairs, we'll raise it with the Minister of Home Affairs. If there's issues around agriculture, we'll go to Stinezen, because you're there, so you must deliver. And our members have got a vested interest in seeing government working well. So it is a bit of a difficult thing. But look, we could see a coalition was going to happen for some time. So we have worked with parties across the line in Parliament to get legislation through. We got amendments through to create parental leave or paternity leave in about 2018. That was an ACDP drafted bill in response to a call by COSATU. We had amendments done to the Public Investment Corporation Act, which is the PIC, which invests workers' pension and insurance funds. That was a DA bill that we we made a submission to Parliament. The DA drafted one. We then convinced the ANC to support it. And, ultimately, it doesn't matter which party you come from. If you agree with what COSATU is saying, we'll be happy. There's an Action SA bill at Parliament in response to a proposal we had made as COSATU around public procurement. There's the EFF bill around insourcing. It's a COSATU campaign. So
there's also the fair pay bill.
There's also, which in fact, we met with Maimani. He had a workshop on it. We're keen on it. So
what are the key elements of that?
I think the key one is a couple, and some will be difficult. I think it's about three key things. One is that you shouldn't be required to disclose your previous salary slip when you go to new employment, because your previous employer might have shortchanged you. It might have been your first job. You were forced to accept a low wage, and to avoid that kind of cascading to be your salary for too long. I think the other one was.
The disclosure of income on advertising. I think.
Yes, the disclosure on advertising, which does help as well. Government does it all the time. It also helps okay, this one might be out of my league. This one might be below my worth, and it makes sense because you don't want people to waste their time. You don't want to waste the recruiting agency or the HR's time as well. That you're applying for a job that clearly. It's above your skill set. I think the other one was about discrimination, if I'm right, kind of equal pay for equal work, if I'm right.
Yes.
Which is there in law already.
Gender inequality, fighting it.
To tighten it. So for us, we're keen on it. And it's a good thing when parties support something that COSATU calls for, we don't care which party you're from. We'll agree on that one. We can disagree tomorrow about everything else. Okay. But if you're agreeing with us on this one, then we're happy to have a conversation.
And finally, team would never let me go without asking about Mkhwanazi. The Mkhwanazi Commission, as a taxpayer, as a labor union activist, how do you feel about the allegations and the fact that a minister is still being paid on special leave while, like you're saying, there are other issues, but there's someone that's being paid an entire minister's salary and just sitting at home? What's your take on that?
Look, it is a difficult catch-22. We supported a commission of inquiry because if there's such serious allegations made by a senior police officer, it would be a disaster to ignore them, to sweep it under the carpet. And we would want those allegations, if they're true, to be dealt with, to clean the police. We don't doubt there is corruption in the police. So I think for us it's useful to have the commission of inquiry to shine a spotlight, even beyond the individual of a minister. We think the corruption goes much, much deeper. It's not just about one person. And we're hopeful that it'll help provide a catalyst to really cleanse the police, to fix the police, to make sure it can be effective in doing crime. So we're amongst the first, if not the first, to call for a commission of inquiry. We felt it had to be a judicial commission to ensure that you had somebody who could sift through allegations, meet the legal requirements, and not be biased. To be fair to the Minister Senzo, we doubt he could be guilty of the things he's accused of. But it's good that, we wouldn't want that clouding of anybody. So if he's guilty, then he must answer to the case. If he's innocent, we'll allow him to move on with his life. But we would hope it to be dealt with quickly. It's a difficult thing because there's so much skeleton, seemingly, which we've long suspected. We've long suspected there's problems in crime intelligence. It's clear that the police management is dysfunctional, that there's faction fights, there's turf wars. But look, it's a good thing because we need to cleanse it. The Commission of Inquiry into SARS, to ESCOM Transit, helped force the cleansing of those institutions, and we've seen improved performance. So if we can do likewise with the police, then we'll be better off for it.
So you don't see it as the president running away from having to make a decision, especially against someone that is seen to be an ally of his?
No, I think, look, he could easily just dismissed him, but you wouldn't have dealt with the underlying issues. If he had ignored them and kept it, that would have been a crisis. So I think it's not an easy choice. It's almost a damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I think this is the best option because it's an external, objective, judicial authority. You're allowing everybody to come and vent their stuff and provide evidence, not just gossip or hearsay. And it forces government afterwards because society will see the reports and will expect actions. So we think it's the best option. And yes, it's messy now. It's not a pretty picture. Same thing with the Parliamentary Committee inquiry. But we'll be better off for it afterwards because society will know exactly what's going on and government will be forced to address it. And we've seen the improvements. SARS was run like a stock fell under a certain commissioner, a previous commissioner. It's cleaned, it's delivering. Transit was run into the ground under some certain people who are now politicians is turning around. Still fragile. Eskom too. I mean, Eskom was a wild west of the amount of looting that was taking place there. And now you see it is turning around. It's still fragile, not out of the woods, but you get a sense that we're heading in the right direction. There's still far to go. So I think for us, the more transparency, the better. No, if the president wanted to cover up, he wouldn't have done this. He could even have dismissed a minister, given him some other deployment.
Send him as ambassador somewhere.
So, and look, to be fair to the minister, he hasn't been found guilty of anything. So he also got right. So it's a difficult thing. Also, be fair to the ANC. The ANC has gone further than what the law requires. It says that if you are charged, you step aside. You haven't seen court. You haven't been found guilty. You haven't been sentenced. But in effect, the ANC is imposing a sentence upon you if you're charged. The Senzo hasn't been charged yet. The day he's charged, you can be sure he'll write his letter of resignation and move on. So that's a good thing, because other parties not doing that. Other parties are appearing before courts. They've been convicted. They're waiting for sentencing. They're singing songs. So we hope other parties would also take this kind of progressive, bold decision. Look, if a labour law that what the ANC does wouldn't pass the test, because you have the right of presuming innocence until found guilty, even the court of law. But I think the ANC was right to respond and say, look, the demon of corruption and cancer, state capital, so deep. We have to be bold. We have to be brutal on this front. So that's a good principle as well.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for making time and sharing insights. It's been a lot of information. I hope you guys have enjoyed it, found it insightful. And if you're not part of a union, you should join one or create one, right?
Should join one. We've got too many unions.
Okay.
Some of them are too small. 200 people here, 500 people there. Worker strength is in the numbers. That's when you have real muscle. And also you need to have enough members to have enough funds to run a union too.
Okay.
So that's what we try to have. So the COSATU's founding kind of call is one union, one industry, one country, one federation, because worker strength is in the numbers. If you have workers scattered over 200 different unions, it's very easy for employers just to ignore them.
Makes sense.
But you're right, workers must join a union, ideally a union in COSATU. But even we do work closely with unions outside of COSATU as well, because at the end of the day, we have different colored t-shirts, but we have the same issues, the same challenges, and we try to work closely together. So we've had unions struggling. We've given them support, even though they're outside of COSATU. We've been giving support to MISA in the motor retail sector because they're facing retrenchments and salary cuts. Doesn't matter if they're not our union, we must support them. We've been working with Solidarity for this week around Denel, where workers are threatened not to get paid. We disagree completely on their politics. But when it comes to workers, it's fine. Because even our own members have got different political views. Our members will vote for every party from the ACDP to the DA to MK to EFF. It's fine. We'll tell them to vote ANC. We'd hope they would. But you live in a democracy. Everybody's got the right to the views. So you're right. So people must join unions, because unions are also what is delivered, what is progress. There's unions which ended child labor, which introduced maternity leave, which introduced overtime pay, how many hours you can and can't work in a week, health and safety rights. So,
okay. Guys, you've heard it for yourself. But once again, thank you for making time. Guys, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment. Let us know what your views are. Are you a part of a union? Would you join one? Palatable Politics.